The story begins as we're introduced to the Alchemist brothers, Edward and Alphonse, also known as Ed and Al. Their mother Trisha falls ill and passes away, after which the boys try to bring her back to life by transmuting her soul. However, this is a taboo process and the law of equivalent exchange comes into effect. This leads to a massive cyclone that takes Ed's leg away and also transports Al to the Gate of Truth. Some time has passed and now we can see Ed all grown up. He's facing off against an old priest named Father Cornello. Ed is interested in retrieving the Philosopher's Stone from Cornello's ring and they battle for a bit. Ed starts to struggle against him but is then rescued by Al, whose soul has inhabited a hollow metallic armor. The brothers fight Cornello's demons and take them down with ease. Cornello notices that Ed can transmute without a vicious circle and has a metallic arm. He suddenly realizes that Ed is the famed Full Metal Alchemist. Seeing no other choice, he tries to escape, but despite his best efforts, Cornello is apprehended by the Flame Alchemist Roy Mustang and Lieutenant Riza Hawkeye. Cornello somehow manages to evade his arrest and runs away while Roy belittles Ed for making a huge mess in the city with his alchemy. He also proves the stone to be a fake, thus rendering this whole exercise as a waste of time. Al tries to clean up after his brother and is then greeted by their childhood friend and mechanic Winry. Ed is questioned by Roy and Riza because there seems to be an interest in using the Philosopher's Stone to transmute humans. Ed reveals that he's only after the stone so that he can get Al's body back, but Roy isn't convinced. They're interrupted by Captain Hughes and General Hakuro. Hughes gets Ed out of trouble by taking him away from Roy. Then Hakuro tells Roy that he wants Ed and Al to meet an alchemist named Sho Tucker. He has the ability to transmute chimeras and make them speak. Meanwhile, Cornello meets with a group of homunculi consisting of lust, envy, and gluttony. He gets belittled by the group for believing in an original Philosopher's Stone, and then Lust kills him, after which she instructs Gluttony to eat his body. Later that night, Ed has a vision where he travels to the Gate of Truth and meets a manifestation of everything that exists in the universe. After an intense experience, he is sent back to the real world and had his leg taken away from him. Then he sees a manifestation of his dead mother and a fallen piece of armor. Suddenly, Ed wakes up from his nightmare and we learn that this is a recurring experience. As a matter of fact, this is a memory from when Ed had actually sacrificed his arm in exchange for allowing Al's soul to inhabit the armor. The next day, the crew is taken to meet Tucker, who lives with his daughter Nina and their dog, Alexander. Ed talks to Tucker about his work while the others play with Nina and Alexander. Ed mentions the troubled history between him and Al, and this gives Tucker an idea. He asks Ed to let Al stay with him for a while so that he can do some research and try to help him get his body back. He also talks about a missing stone researcher called Marco and advises Ed to go look for him. Ed conveys this information to Hughes and sets out with Winry on a train to go look for Marco in his last known location. Tucker starts to work on Al's soul and tells him that he's losing his false memories. He even makes Al question his entire existence. Ed and Winry go to the Morrow Hospital and come across Marco, but he greets them with his gun. Ed diffuses the situation and knocks him out with his alchemy. They question him later and Marco advises them to stay away from the stone, as they don't know what they're dealing with. However, they are suddenly interrupted by Lust, who has come to assassinate Marco. He shoots at her multiple times, but it's of no use and she kills him in front of Ed and Winry before disappearing. Just before he passes away, Marco gives Ed the Philosopher's Stone and talks about a secret location named Lab 5. Ed visits Tucker with this information and finds that he has managed to transmute yet another chimera. However, he soon figures out that Tucker has sacrificed Nina and Alexander in order to achieve this, and he had done the same thing before with his wife. Ed beats him up, but Al stops him just in time before it gets fatal. Roy arrests Tucker and ridicules Ed for getting so affected by what happened to Nina. Ed gives him a lecture, but he simply ignores him and leaves. Ed locks himself up in the library and tries to figure a way to reverse the transmutation process. But then he's persuaded by Hughes and General Ross to speak up about lab number 5. As they struggle with their research, Hakuro drops by and helps them out by identifying a clue for the lab's location. But then, they get news of riots in the town, so they head out to handle the situation. Later, Al confronts Ed by saying that he had intentionally given him false memories and he might not even be his brother. Ed tries to reason with him, but it doesn't work and the brothers fight. Ed gives up after a while, and then Winry rebukes Al for even doubting his brother's sacrifices. Ed and Al finally make up and decide to trust each other no matter what. In the meantime, Hughes manages to spot the lab's location but is then confronted by Lust. They fight, and Hughes is able to keep her down long enough for him to escape. Unfortunately, as he tries to get in touch with the military, Roy shows up and shoots him down. The news spreads and Ed is taken to the East Area headquarters where he's kept as a prisoner along with Riza. She tells him that Hughes has been murdered by Roy and that Tucker has also been set free from prison. Upon further discussion, they learn that Lab 5 is located in an old prisoners of war camp. The two of them come up with a plan and free themselves from captivity, after which they head towards the camp. Roy reaches the camp and is confronted by Ross. They get interrupted by Ed and Riza, and Roy uses the distraction to burn Ross. However, she reawakens from her molten shell and reveals herself to be Envy in disguise. Lust and Gluttony also appear and tell our heroes that it was Envy who had killed Hughes while disguised as Roy so that they could lock him away. But when questioned about Tucker, the homunculi don't know the answer, and Envy goes to investigate the issue. Lust attacks Riza, and Roy injures himself while trying to protect her. Ed runs after Lust and eventually comes across Al and a knocked-out Winry who are being held as hostages. Tucker shows up and uses his leverage to force Ed to take off his metal arm so that he can't use his alchemy. Ed quickly learns that Tucker wants to transmute the Philosopher's Stone, and then Tucker goes on to show the numerous copies of the stone that had been created by Marco and his team. However, before he can continue with his explanation, Lust shows up and quickly kills him. Riza and Roy make it to the scene, and then General Hakuro shows up as well. It turns out that he was the mastermind behind this plan all along. He goes on to explain that he's been trying to make an army of invincible soldiers by using the powers of the Philosopher's Stone. He displays a vast army of dormant bodies and then hastily injects all of them with the essence of the clone stones. The army awakens and frees itself from confinement. Hakuro tries to command them, but he has released them much sooner than expected and gets killed immediately. Ed, Al, and Roy face off against the army, and Gluttony starts eating up the zombie soldiers as well. Winry finally comes back to her senses, and Ed quickly asks her to fix his arm. Roy sends Riza away to prepare the military against the army, and then he goes after the homunculi. He catches up and burns Envy over and over again, but he is weakened from his injury and is about to get killed by Lust. Right at that moment, Ed drops by and uses his powers to save him. Despite repeated blows, Lust continues to revive herself and shows the alchemists her secret power. The homunculi are man-made and powered by Philosopher's Stones, just like her. Then Envy recovers from his burns but appears to be much weaker than before. Seeing this, Ed realizes that the homunculi are not immortal and have a limited number of lives. Envy tries to run away, but Roy manages to burn him one last time, and it's good enough to kill him. Lust gets angry and is about to hurt Ed, but then Al saves him by blocking her attack. Then Roy burns Lust continuously for a while, and then rips the Philosopher's Stone out of her body so that she can die for good. Roy hands the stone to Ed, who uses it to transport himself to the Gate of Truth, despite Al strongly advising him against it. He meets the being again and is able to see Al's real body, but eventually decides not to transmute his soul and promises Al that he'll be back for him. Meanwhile, Riza and the military battle against the army and win after a lengthy fight. Ed comes back to the real world and apologizes to Al for not going through with the transmutation. But Al is fine with it, as he never wanted to risk a human soul for it. Now that the dust has settled, Roy and Ed put aside their differences and become friends. Then we see Ed, Al, and Winry on their next journey. There's also a post-credit scene that shows a small parasite coming out of Envy's burnt body and then running away. This brings the movie to an end. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed and turn on the notification bell to never miss another upload. Goodbye!